You're watching Medfield TV, Community Shows.
Good evening and welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, January 15th, 2019. This meeting has been called to order. As always, this meeting is being video recorded, so conduct yourselves accordingly. We will begin, as always, by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving in the Middle East and around the world. Thank you. And finally, I wanted to note as well that there are funeral arrangements for former Police Chief Bill Mann, which will be visitation this Friday, January 18th, 4 to 8 p.m. At the Robert Mitchell Caruso Funeral Home. And the funeral service is on Saturday at 11 a.m. at the United Church of Christ for Chief Mann. All right. So before we get to our agenda, I did want to note, and I will only note this so that he doesn't charge out of the room, but this is our last meeting with our town administrator, Mike Sullivan, after 44 years.
Hey.
I wanted to note my thanks and the board's thanks and recognition of that, this sort of historic and sad meeting of the Board of Selectmen. Mike will be sorely missed, although I suspect that we will continue to hear from him when he makes mistakes.
Still be in town, yeah.
So we'll look to the thing. If I say anything else, he will charge out of here, so that's the answer.
I think he has a prepared speech.
It was, but I didn't want to take your half hour.
Whereas?
No, I just wonder, well, all these people, I heard you shouldn't come in out of the rain, but you shouldn't come in out of the cold either. So you could have watched this on TV and it kept warm. But thank you for coming out.
I would just like to note, this is probably the largest crowd we've had in a long time, and it's good to see all these people turned out just for your last meeting.
Does that mean they plan to get rid of me? Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to work with the board and with Evelyn and Chris. We do have long tenure. Evelyn's been here, 31 years. Chris has been here, will be here 20 years in March. So 20, yes, she's gaining on me. So, but I'm sure they'll both do a wonderful job and keep the Medfield we always know. And I want to thank the people for putting up with all my tirades about state and federal government. And although lately everyone's starting to sound like me. Yes, and my puns, yes.
We will bring you back annually for a doom and gloom.
Yes, there we go. So.
Thank you. All right, so our first appointment is with Michael Taylor, who is going to discuss the Medfield Rail Trail and warrant article.
It's actually going to be Christian Donner, who's actually really leading the call.
Tonight's meeting, playing the role of Michael Taylor, will be Christian Donner.
It's not here yet. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.
It's not here. It's
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the absence of a projector, I'm just going to hand you the slides, and hopefully we can get through this quickly. There was about 20 minutes, I think, allocated for this agenda item, so I'll try to get through the informational part in 10 or 15, and then we will leave some time for discussion. So we wanted to take this opportunity of the closing year, 2018, to provide an informal, more or less informal report, update on the successes that we've had, that the Friends of the Medfield Rail Trail have had in 2018, and then look at what the original plan was, what we presented about a year ago, and where we are today in relation to that. And wanted to give you an update on fundraising progress, and wanted to report on a consultant that we've hired to help with this phase and make us more effective and efficient until we actually get the lease signed and can work towards construction on the ground. And then we have some questions for the board. So with that, I proceed to, which is now slide 3. And so that's the update on progress we've had, as you recall, I'm sure you do, a successful town vote at town meeting last year, where we projected to get the $100,000 grant from the DCR, which we did. In addition to that, we have raised about $60,000 to date, but we'll get to that. And the next step is still signing a lease with the MBTA, and that's what we're working towards. And the remainder of the slide deck is basically going to talk about that. Slide 4 has an update on the scope. This is just this is pretty much the same slide that we've presented to you about a year ago, with the various budget items and associated cost for what we think is phase 1, which is the work that would have to be done and funded before we want to sign a lease with the MBTA, because it's kind of a logical point in time where enough work is done so that we can leave it in a semi-finished state while we work on additional fundraising, and the trail is usable at that point. And so if we have soft costs, that is legal for lease with the MBTA, survey, design, additional design work, more detailed design, getting approval from the MBTA, et cetera, et cetera. So these line items here are basically taken from the Beals and Thomas design study that we did 2 years ago now. So removal of rails and tires, erosion control, getting the insurance policy that we've discussed at length with this board, installing reclaimed asphalt and stone dust top surface, and that's pretty much on the entire length of the trail all the way to the Dover line. Total is $318,000. And some notes to that. The soft costs that we are projecting, which is over $100,000, are costs that could be provided by the town in some form, and we'll get to the details of what's behind that. Or if it needs to be contracted out, these are kind of the estimates that we're projecting it would cost to do that. Then we're also exploring, because this is sort of a waterfall approach where we have design, putting the work out for bid, doing the construction. So there are certain requirements if we follow that approach for the specificity of the design and all the upfront work that needs to be done. But as we know, there are other models to do this in a more iterative and, as we call it, alternate approach, where for example, we look at the design study that we've done and the plans that are in there and that Robert Whiteknecht put together for us, and work with the DPW, with the MBTA, on getting them to accept the design as it is, and then working with the contractor on filling in the gaps, and that reduce the amount of cost that's necessary up front by quite a bit. And so we're working at that, exploring this. Could save us $80,000 or up to $80,000 compared to the projected cost. Another line item here that's at the high end is the insurance cost. We have 2 quotes, one at $21,000, one at $37,000. We assume the higher one. I'm going to skip phase 2 because not that important at this point, and proceed to slide 6, which is funding sources and progress to date. We have the $100,000 from the DCR. We have $25,000, and some of you have not color version of the printout, so these check marks here are color coded. The BCRTA donation, so this is money that has been promised to us from the Bay Colony Rail Trail Association, $25,000. We've raised $50,000 plus from private parties in Medfield. We've projected, so this is in yellow because it's still in progress. We've projected $53,000 from corporate donors, which is still in progress. And we've projected $90,000 of in-kind work in the form of materials or time from the DBW, town council, other sources in town that could possibly contribute to the work. In total, it's $318,600. So the $90,000 for in-kind work is something that we want to talk about. Once again, I'm skipping the Phase 2 funding sources because it's not really, it hasn't changed. These are still the original numbers from last year. Then we have an update on Beals and Thomas. We've retained Robert Whiteknecht to help us with, on an hourly basis with getting us through this phase of the project and advising us on trail design, permitting process, construction. And he will also help us with additional fundraising and grant work. And that leads me to slide 9, which details the what we call soft cost and various tasks that are needed for this, and whether the town could potentially help out with some of these things. And we've met with Mo Goulet a few months ago, and informally just wanted to feel him out a bit and get some information. And so there was nothing specifically that came out of this meeting, and so we want to ask again, what does the board think about legal services, permitting, construction administration, managing the contractor, culvert cleanout? Well, that's a very detailed line item here. Recycle asphalt installation, materials, road crossing improvements. So, do you want me to just finish the last slide and then talk about it? Or you want to respond right now? It was a
Happy to have you
question.
finish
Yeah?
and then let us respond.
Okay, so then the last slide, page 10, with the potential that there be a funding shortfall. And the timeline that we have in place, and the DCR grant, $100,000 that we would have to spend by December 2020. Otherwise, we'll risk losing the $100,000 grant. Does the Board of Selectmen think it would be advisable to put a placeholder in the town warrant for 2019 so that we could potentially close some of that gap or all of it? That's the second question. And the amounts, once again, the amounts depend on the accuracy of the estimates, that we have to assume they are what they are, and the in-kind support of the town, and the continued success of fundraising between now and really the end of 2020, because we would continue fundraising while construction is going on. So there are some dependencies here. The timeline is important because we do want to sign the lease so that there is enough time to actually spend the $100,000. That's, if you recall, it's a reimbursement grant, so you actually have to do work on the ground to get the money back from the state. And so we have to start with the process, putting the work out to bid and finding contractors who do the work, and actually starting with the work on the ground for some portion of it. We can take some portion of the $100,000 and spend it on other things, not necessarily construction, but not all of it. And so the timeline puts us in a in a position where we could potentially lose the $100,000 if we can't raise all the money in time. And the question is, how much is the money that we need? It's, I just presented the figures. Do we need all of that before we sign the lease? That's another question, but maybe, not something that we need a specific answer right now. But in general terms, what kind of resources could the town offer to let us use personnel, materials, time, whatever?
Thank you. I think we understand the question.
Okay.
Just a quick clarifying factual question. Where did things shake out with the official appointed rail trail committee last summer? I know we had discussions about whether it was going to continue or remain, and there was a question about whether we needed to continue with an official town-appointed committee that was going to act in an advisory role with respect to the rail trail. And sitting here at this moment, I don't remember whether we disbanded it or not, or kept it as something else.
I don't think it was disbanded.
I think we did keep it.
Thought we kept it.
I think we kept it.
You wanted it disbanded, but we kept it.
Right, so. all right.
Well, yes, I thought we disbanded it, but.
No, I think we kept it because we thought it might be necessary to have an advisory committee as if the town was going to be entered into contracts to represent the town in that situation. But let me turn it over to Pete for questions or comments initially.
So I guess my first question has to do with initially when we were talking about doing this a long time ago.
Yeah.
Iron Rail was going to do it for the cost of the money that they were going to get out of the resalvaging of the rails. And I wasn't quite sure where that money comes in here. Is that part of that 90,000?
It's factored into, I think, the rail and tie removal, so that line item that is estimated as $30,000 in reality costs more around $100,000, and the values offsets
Salvage
that.
value's paying
Yes.
70 or something then.
Right.
Okay, all right. So I guess in terms of the specific questions that you've asked, I would, it's clearly a political decision whether you put something on the annual town meeting warrant article as to whether, but, given your posture, it seems to me it might make sense for you guys to do that, just to have it as a backstop. And then you can ask the town for money if you're having trouble meeting your goals, is the way I would think of it.
We talked about this at length, back and forth. It's if we don't and keep fundraising, and another year goes by, and it's April 2020. We don't really if we at that point decide to ask for additional money, and what we are asking for, between $50,000 and $150,000, something like that. If we wait a year, it might be too late to still get through the process of procuring the contractor and starting construction and actually spending money on the ground. And so the December 2020 is the hard stop for the grant, and it would be very unfortunate, we think, if we all the work that went into this, if we can't use it.
In terms of employing town services or personnel, I was hoping that the DPW could assist you, and I know that you've talked to Mo and that he didn't seem to be forthcoming with much. But, I know that they can build sidewalks, they did a lot of work at the high school, I think, and all kinds of places around town, so that they seem to have a lot of capability.
Maybe not. Maybe it's you personnel resources. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it wasn't slam dunk request. So, and understandably, that's not the model that I think the town would customarily apply when work is done. Right. So typically, you hire contractors and have a manager also on staff. Contracted out, managing the contractor. That's how Mo described it to us. And we can do that with Robert Weicknecht, who would be a great person to be in that role, because he's been very involved with the Holliston Rail Trail. He's familiar with all the parts of the process, permitting and construction and everything, and so he'd be great. But it's just another cost item. So we just want direction. We're really looking for a sense of where the Board of Selectmen, where the town thinks we should be steering this project, because there is a wide range of options right now, and some of those might not work out the way we think. So, so this is really just asking for guidance.
I guess, well, my comment would be in general that if the town can have you supply some assistance through the DPW servicing and providing some work on it, it strikes me that the town would certainly endorse that. The town as a whole would endorse that, so.
So specifically, what process should we follow then to get to a point where we have some,
Let's go through the rest of us first, and then we'll kind of come back. Is that okay?
the rest of this evening's agenda, you mean? Or?
No, Gus and me, we can weigh in on this, and then
Okay.
talk amongst
Oh, sure.
ourselves.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Gus?
So it's my turn. In my head, when we first started talking about the rail trail, and we presented it to get the initial approval of the town, what stuck in my head was that at the very back end of this process, there was a potential liability of the town, and I'm going to say for something like $125,000 if we were not able to raise the back end funds. And there was also a discussion of using DPW as a contribution in kind, as opposed to up at the front end, DPW support as a contribution in kind, but not a direct financial contribution. Is my recollection going back like a year and a half, is that roughly correct?
So, yes, I think you're roughly correct. Let me just explain. I think we had originally broken this out into three phases, or three separate amounts, and the $130-something thousand that you mentioned is in the 300 and
Okay.
how much was it? Because we had planned originally to have somewhere around $230,000 when we signed the lease, which would have not given us a usable trail, right?
I was trying to remember whether it was for the long-term care of the trail or the upkeep, because I remember it was back end.
Let's,
Well, so my point is.
that's a separate point, yeah.
What we first heard on this trail was in terms of a cash outlay.
Yeah.
There was no town cash outlay on the front end. There
Right.
was a potential cash outlay on the back end with an optimistic expectation that we would probably be able to raise that money too. So
Yeah.
I
So-
kind of stuck in my head that was the one risk factor that we had taken on board when we approved this by the town.
But let me just reiterate, I think we have taken that out of the equation, because, like, as you said, we had originally proposed to raise $230,000, sign the lease, start construction, and then the surface finishing was not included in that. And then there was the question, what do we do if we can't get that? Can the town leave the trail with just a rough grading, and what's the exposure to environmental risk there? And so, but we've lumped that together. We don't want to do that. We want to do it all at once.
Okay.
Hence the shortfall.
Okay.
And so there is no, that liability is gone, because once if there is a stone dust finish surface, you can wait 10 years to raise the additional 100,000 or whatever we need for fencing and parking and all these things that are non-essential.
Here's what I think you just told me. The back-end liability that I've had on my mind has gone away, but it's been replaced by a nearer-term potential request of town funds.
Yes.
Okay, got that. Now let me go through a couple things on the slide 6. This is funding sources phase 1. The private donations is down as 50,000, and if I'm following correctly, you've raised 30,000 of that 50,000. But you're expecting to get another 20,000.
Yeah, and it's been going really well. I mean,
Okay.
we had a single
Yeah.
family who donated $10,000, and and this is,
So I believe that.
yeah.
The corporate sponsors 53.6 you said was also in process, but you
Yes.
didn't put a number down. So where are we at on the
By the
corporate?
low end. We just did a mail campaign to Memo members, and some of you may have received it, just before Christmas. And so it was very, very recent, and some of that came back, but we haven't really taken it to the next level.
Okay,
So this is
all right. So I'm being deliberately pessimistic here, just so that we're balanced in our perspective. So if I looked at those two, I would say I'm being pessimistic.
Yeah.
We're potentially 50,000 short on those two categories. That if it stayed that short, we'd probably be talking about the town adding more. So, and again, I'm being pessimistic, so you get 90,000 is that in-kind on the last line, and I'm adding the 50,000 to it, saying the worst that this could be is 140,000 for the town between in-kind and out-of-pocket.
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's worst case.
Okay, if I then jump to the, let's see, that was 6, 8, slide 9, which is the questions for selectmen. The items, your question is, could the town provide any of these services? The total value of these services, I think, is $61,600. I'm just adding the numbers up. And I may not be quite right here, but I'm looking at the last four, or the last five, not counting the other at the bottom. So construction, administration, culvert cleanout, recycled asphalt, road crossing improvements. Are those the things that could potentially be the in-kind DPW contribution? I'm not saying they are, but
They could, yeah, these are the ones that we've called out.
okay. So the max that we would, if DPW wanted or could commit to all of that, it's about 50,000 of the funding that you're looking for.
11, 20, 26, 27.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
a little, maybe
Okay.
60, but yeah, in the general ballpark.
50,000 and 6,000 for legal, 5,000 for.
Okay. All I'm trying to do right here is to try to figure out if there was an article that went into the 2019 warrant, what number would it be likely to look like? And if we need an answer from DPW on that first.
Yes.
But that's a $50,000 chunk out of what currently is a $90,000 total request.
So we think that we have more accurate numbers in the March timeframe because of the ongoing work that we just started with Robert White on potentially alternatives. And so we are talking to the Conservation Commission, for example, on next Thursday about their specific requirements. And maybe they're, maybe we can cut a corner there, I call it that, but, or, in other areas. So we're looking at that. We're starting to talk to the MBTA also about their requirement. They have to sign off on the design. So it depends on, how detailed a design the MBT wants from us. And Robert Weitknecht has done this before, and there are examples in other areas where they didn't require a very detailed design. And so we might get away with what we have.
So that was my next question. You talked about potentially we could look at alternative approaches to the design or go with what we have. Right. That's basically a decision that'll be based on what the MBTA is willing to accept, is what we're saying.
Yes,
okay.
Correct. But we don't know that. So these are still numbers, and specifics are moving.
Yep.
But before town meeting, we will have a more reliable estimate.
Okay. And then the last question I have around the information, the December 2020 deadline for the grant that we currently have, does that require the contractor to be under contract, or does that require the project to be done?
Neither. It requires that enough work was invoiced so that we can file for reimbursement with the state. I mean, we have to have the receipts basically so that we can go to the states. I don't think we have to, whether the contractors could pre-bill and these sort of arrangements. I don't want to go there, but I think at a high level, it means that some of the work is done, that enough of the work is done so we can spend that money.
The reason I asked the question is I was trying to figure out whether it's the 2019 town meeting that we would need an article requesting funding, or whether it would be the 2020 town meeting that would get you funding by the 1st of July with 6 months left to go. Assuming perhaps the contract, if we are committed to doing something here, presumably the contractor could be brought on board before that, but whatever the funding needed to be, would be made available on July 1st of 2020 rather than 2019.
Exactly, and this is the question I didn't ask, when can we come towards, when we come in before the board and ask, to sign the lease, how much money do we have to have in the bank at that point, so that you feel comfortable, that we're not making stuff up, basically, right?
So let me just close out by saying with the softness of the numbers right now, I don't know how to commit to a number. If it's helpful to commit to a philosophical position, I'm guessing that we could take a look at these numbers and get to a philosophical decision without a firm commitment on numbers. And then the only other point about the DPW, that's potentially 50,000 of this. Like Pete, I would be, if DPW says they can do it, I would be supportive of that because I think this is a good thing for the town. I'd be reluctant to tell DPW they have to do it.
Yeah.
So my reaction is it would be for you to go with Mo, and then if he says no way, no how, I want to pave my driveway before I do anything else, then we'd talk to him. But I don't think I'd want to be in a position of directing Mo to do something like this if DPW says they can't do it. Then we have to come back to the cost side again. But
All right, thanks. So let me give you a couple of just quick thoughts, and then first, as to the question of how much you need to raise for us to sign the lease, I don't necessarily think there's any greater liability in signing the lease if you're going to build it in a year or build it in 10 years. And so in terms of what do you need to sign the lease, I think if we have the insurance, we can sign the lease, and if it takes you 10 years to raise the money to build it, it takes 10 years. I don't see any greater risk to the town of owning an unredeveloped rail bed as opposed to owning a redeveloped rail bed. So that's my first thought on it. There's a factual question there as to whether there's any greater risk. Second thought on DPW, I think if they can, they should. And I think if they're looking to us for some guidance on where this would fit as a priority when they have time, I'm not going to tell them not to resurface a road that we need or to peel off from plowing the road to go do this. But to the extent they have some time and they can do this, I have no objection to that. And I think we need to have Mo and talk about it. With respect to town meeting, the duly constituted committee, that's a committee of the town of Medfield, under the town charter can put whatever article it wants on the town meeting warrant. I think is it only 10 citizens to get on the annual town meeting warrant for a warrant article? From my perspective, I don't think if we have $50,000 to throw at a project that's unnecessary but nice, there's way more beneficial projects than this one. Right? I mean, how many sidewalks do you build on busy streets for $50,000? How many things you can do with $50,000? And so for me, I've supported this throughout on the premise that it's going to be 100% privately funded. And so my view will be it should still be 100% privately funded. And if there's that much support for it, I mean, raising another $100,000 in Medfield should be pretty easy. I mean, we raised, how much for the football field 20 years ago? And so, I think if you can't raise another $100,000 in Medfield to do this, then I think it's the kind of thing people are happy to have if it's costless, but if they're not willing to donate for it. So my position on the number of tax dollars that should go to this is zero. So,
Okay.
Again, I'm only one person. They may disagree, but that's my view, and you're welcome to put
Okay
whatever
with
you
in
want.
kind.
Oh, in kind, I think we should. Again, the DPW on a lot of projects we've done in town, when they have extra time, I think they've been great about jumping in on some of this stuff. And so I think for that, and again, if Mo wants to, going to talk to Mo and say, look, I've got X amount of extra time, and here are the 3 things I can do with it. If they're looking for some input from us about that, I'm happy to have that meeting with him. So.
Okay, that's helpful.
With that hard-nosed response, though, we appreciate the work you're doing on this, and it's not intended to be in any way a message about the work that you're doing now and the work you've done to get us here.
All right.
Right. Well, you're willing to give him money, Gus, though. I'm the only one saying no.
I've donated. Private donations. You take private donations from Selectmen.
We do, yes. The MFI does.
All right.
Very great.
Thank you, Christian.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask one question?
Yes, Mr. Sullivan.
When we started this discussion, there was discussion of a $50,000 insurance liability contract that the MBTA would require. Was that funded from another source, or?
No, that's
is
in
that-
there. That's the $37,000. But I mentioned that we have a quote for 21, so it could be less than that. But we had agreed, leading up to town vote last year, we had agreed that we would, plan to pay for that. for the policy, yes.
So, but that's not included in here.
Oh, it is included.
Yeah.
No, that's all, that's
There's
part
an
of the.
insurance
It's
law.
part of the
Part of the
31.
figures.
Yeah, that's the insurance number, Mike.
On, slide 6, is it?
Yeah, whatever the scope phase one is, it's under
Slide 4.
insurance for
Okay,
37,000.
Okay.
It would be a prerequisite, it would have to be paid when we sign the lease, basically, right? It's understood.
Thank you.
It's slide 4.
Slide 4. Oh, I'm doing 2. Yes, the
Oh,
second
thanks,
page.
Christian.
Thank you, Christian. All right, Rob Gregg, welcome. So we have Rob Gregg, Chair of Medfield's Peak House Heritage Center, to discuss remediation of the Peak House Tercentenary sign, to vote to sign a letter of endorsement addressed to the Mass DOT, and to identify a stakeholder to the Peak House Heritage Center. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, you have in front of you a 3-page document that I submitted as a background to the action plan and to what the requests are. And the first request is for you gentlemen to sign a letter of endorsement that would go to the Mass DOT, who is the owner of the Tercentenary sign in front of the Peak House. I gave you some background as to when it was established and talked a little bit about the mistakes that are in it. You do not identify them by driving by, but you must stand in front of them to read it. And I think both the Mass DOT and the town of Medfield realize that this is not the equivalent of Mount Rushmore. And so we're not looking to change the face of things. But there are 3 mistakes in the sign that for some reason got put in there in 1930. And one of them was that Seth Clark was the owner of the Peak House. That was incorrect. His father, Benjamin, was the fellow that built the Peak House. That it was rebuilt in 1680. If Seth Clark was the owner, he was not yet born. 1687 was his birthday. So Seth is figured in a number of mistakes there. And the house was not rebuilt. The original Peak House that stands about 4 rods to the northeast of the present Peak House was indeed burned on the day that King Philip's War arrived in Medfield. And it was rebuilt in after 1711, and we have that as hard evidence when a dendrologist went in and took 6 drillings of the Summa beam in the Peak House and identified the fact that the tree that built that beam was indeed felled in 1711. So the house cannot be built before the tree was cut and milled. So
They do that by looking at the ring space?
Yep.
Okay.
So we what we have today is science on our on one respect. We also have factual historical information that was in 1930 was available in the vital records to 1850 for the town of Medfield. So this information could have been identified, but for some reason it wasn't. And so the request is today for the Mass DOT to simply change the 3 mistakes that are on it, not by recasting the entire sign, but simply by grinding out the mistakes and then recasting the letters or painting the letters in. We feel it's a reasonable request in terms of what Mass DOT can do, but they have their own guidelines and rules for things, and so until push comes to shove, we really don't know how they're going to respond. Some of the early communication I did have with Mass DOT was the fact that there was a little pushback on this, but I don't think they had all the details that they needed. The reference was to the work that was supervised by Samuel Eliot Morrison, a renowned professor of Harvard history. The fact that he had a finger in all this, and so therefore it it stands to reason that he knew what he was doing. They respond to these tercentenary signs as historic roadside artifacts that interprets history, and to that extent, Mr. White said in one letter that he was reluctant to alter the text. But my feeling is these are 3 words that we're asking to change, and it can be done easily, and it would be more correct. So that's the request that I put in front of you in terms of a letter of endorsement that goes to Mass DOT to support this change.
Questions, Pete?
I guess if it's not correct, I would suggest we support getting it corrected.
Thank you.
Yep.
I agree as well. All right.
My preference would be a recast correction rather than just paint, because it's better, but it's...
I agree, because there's a dimension on the recasting, but there's a few letters, and as you can see in the diagram I put, that those letters fit in the spaces where they're going to have to grind it down. So we're not asking for the moon. All right. Well, thank you for doing that, and if you can see your way to signing that letter, I appreciate it. Send it off. Thank you. The second request is on page 2 for the selectmen to identify within the town administration a stakeholder that will participate in the planning process for the newly reimagined Peak House Heritage Center that will happen at that site. And we're looking for key people as part of that group, about 8 in number altogether, who have knowledge, wisdom, and insight in terms of the direction that Medfield needs to go and wants to go with regard to cultural tourism today, as well as to enhancing the history of our town. And so that's why we feel it's critical to have a stakeholder from the town administration to participate in that process. So I make that request to you to identify who that person might be.
Can we get back to you on that? Or do you have someone in mind? Or because I was going to suggest that we might want a suggestion from as to who that might be. Or do you have someone in mind? Is this
No, it's an open question.
Okay.
That's why I come to you. We have already identified other stakeholders, so it's not that, we have a meeting tomorrow at 8:30, which we need to have everybody on board. It's not the issue. So,
I did have one question. Are you asking specifically for somebody from the town administration as opposed to the school department? And the reason I'm asking is because if Richard DeSorger was still in town, that would be the first name I would think of, and he would have been a history teacher. So are you specifically talking about town administration or just somebody in town government on one side or the other?
I'll clarify, town government, because we're also going to go to the school department.
So you're also trying to get somebody.
I'm going to ask
so it
for-
is town
for a
administration.
statement,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
okay? So can we take that under advisement and get back to you if we get a recommendation from
I think it's a reasonable request.
town administration? All right.
Good, thank you.
We don't want to force somebody into the spot if they're already tapped out. So
I understand.
All right.
Thank you.
We need a vote to sign the letter of endorsement.
okay, Gus.
I move that we sign the letter of endorsement to DOT requesting that the tercentenary sign be corrected as presented to us tonight.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Kimberly Gargano and Denise DePiro are here to discuss safety oversight with respect to the Westwood Gun Club and the club's proposed expansion. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could just introduce yourselves for the folks at home when you start talking.
Of course, thank you. Good evening, Board of Selectmen, and thank you for meeting with us this evening. And thank you to all whom have come out tonight. We really appreciate your being here. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Gargano, and this is Denise DePiro, who is a long-term resident of Medfield. Each of us have young families here in town. We're here today on behalf of the Medfield community to share our questions and concerns regarding the Westwood Gun Club. We have made countless attempts to speak with someone about the club to settle some of our concerns. We have spoken to almost every town hall department. We've also reached out to the Medfield Police Department. These efforts have led us here, to you, as we understand this board oversees the Westwood Gun Club. In order to restore confidence, it is our hope that we can improve the dialogue between the town of Medfield, its residents, and the Westwood Gun Club. As mothers, as parents, we need some assurances that when our children are outside playing, they are safe. Specifically, our goals are: 1, to improve the relationship between the residents and the Westwood Gun Club. 2, improve the lines of communication with the town, as well as the Westwood Gun Club. And our questions are to please have a better understanding of what is planned with regards to the expansion at the Westwood Gun Club. Understand who is responsible for oversight at the Westwood Gun Club, and understand who we may call if we have questions or concerns about the Westwood Gun Club. Medfield is a wonderful and special community. We want to be good neighbors, and most importantly, we want our children to be safe. We appreciate your time tonight, and we look forward to collaborating with you on a solution that satisfies everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm good.
Oh, you're good, okay. So I will say I have learned more about gun club regulation in the last 3 days than I ever thought I would know. And so we have been digging into this since we got your email. I guess it was last Thursday was when we first learned about this. So thank you for coming. And
Thank you.
we usually just go in order of questions. I did invite, I think Chief Homey is here in the back, and our building commissioner, Gary Pelletier, is here as well. I think I see Gary back there.
My name's Ed George. I represent the club.
Oh, good.
At some point, we can have some comments.
Yeah, just use the microphone. Yeah.
Well, I'm handicapped, so if you want
You want to just pass it to him, Jerry?
Yes, my name is Ed George Jr., actually. I represent the Westwood Gun Club. I've represented them on a number of occasions going back to 2013 and before that.
Okay.
So at some point, we would probably I would like to add a few comments with regard to the ladies' questions.
Sure.
Okay?
Mr. George, could I ask you a question? When you say you represent the Westwood Gun Club,
I'm an
are you saying
attorney.
You're a member or you're an attorney?
No, I'm an attorney.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, all right. So,
I think you have other people you want to hear from first, though, right? Or
well, I think we're going to ask the questions that we have. I think we can answer some of these questions based on what we've learned so far, and then I'm happy to have you comment. I mean, this is sort of an informational session.
Sure.
This is not an adjudicatory hearing
Sure.
of any kind
Yep.
to make any decisions or vote on anything. It's just, this is an informational opportunity. We have done a lot of research as to what's going on so far, and we'll share that with you as best we can. And then I'm happy to hear from Mr. Jordan.
just let me know when, sir.
I will let you
Can I
know.
just ask, is there anyone else from the Westwood Gun Club here
Yes, there are
tonight?
a number of the officers here.
Okay.
Great. Well, welcome to you all. Pete, questions?
I guess I would just start by asking, it sounds like you feel like you've been having trouble contacting the Westwood Gun Club.
Yes, sir.
Have you had any discussions with them at all?
So information has been very difficult to acquire. There's no phone number listed. However, we have
Based on
what? There's no phone number listed on the website. This doesn't work. It doesn't carry.
It doesn't, that just
Yeah, you might just
goes
have
to
to,
the
no,
TV.
you have to stay behind the mic so the people at home can hear you, but if you just speak up for our folks in the back.
So yes, we have reached out to the gun club directly via email, and we have requested to communicate with them, and our request was denied. There's no phone number listed on the website, and so it's been very difficult, which is why we then started to try to reach out to the town, and so those were where the challenges were.
Sure.
All right. That was my main question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes?
because I actually had a chance to meet with the two women and Sean Kay this morning. So I had a little bit of background, and I took, you guys didn't realize this, but I did take a drive for the first time in 23 years of living around here to go see the Westwood Gun Club this afternoon, just to see what it looked like. Here's what I think I understand about the substance of this. What you're putting up is actually a roof over the firing points on your 200-yard range. So it's not exactly an expansion. It might be an improvement. I believe that's what the case is. Just so we at least know what the actual substance of this issue here. It's not actually an expansion. There's a few issues that have come up for me, and the most important one, I think, and what I hear in your words, is this is an issue in many ways of the neighbors in that area and the gun club just having a good relationship. And I don't sense that there's any intention on either side to try to pull a fast one on anybody or to try to go, attack or push in either direction. To me, fundamentally, it's just a weakness in the communications that led to concern that something was being hidden, that led to concern that whatever was being hidden must be a bad thing that nobody wants us to know about. And the best I can determine is just an unfortunate lack of communication or lack of easy communication. So I say that partly because I think that's the root of this problem. But I also say it because I did a little bit of other legwork about the Westwood Gun Club, and I've gotten very good comments from former members of your club about the kind of club you run, the safe club that you run. So there's, as far as I can determine, there's nothing here of substance about anybody doing something drastically wrong. This has more to do with a breakdown in communication. So I don't have questions because I've been spending the day trying to get answers, but just to set a tone here, I think that's the focus. And if I were, I had no appreciation of how close the Wood End houses are until I drove down Wood End and said, oh, that's the clubhouse I just drove by, right? And so I was a little, if I had kids, reassuring parents that their kids you don't have to worry about their kids playing in the woods at the back of their lot. That's an important thing to do. And not that anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just that that's something we ought to all address just because it's the right way to do it. And I think there's a good answer out of this that's probably starts with that.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll come, that's the big one. If you want, I can. There were a couple of other things, but you didn't really raise them in detail. I think on the town side, there seems to be some lack of reliable information. I think Chief Wilhelmi, this is why we asked you to be here, is that I'm not sure how far back we're going, but there was a period of time when people would try to talk to the Medfield police, I guess, about what was going on at the gun club, and the Medfield police would direct them to the Walpole police. They'd call the Walpole police, and the Walpole police would laugh and say, that's a Medfield problem. I'm just not sure how far back we have to go to have that be there, so I don't know if it's still a problem. If it is a problem, then we need to certainly take care of it. But
Chief, do you want to comment? You want to come on up and comment? Chief Wilhelmi?
I guess the easiest way is just tell me what you want to know, and if I know it, I'll, all right, you can stand right there, I'll stand right with you.
So let's start, maybe I'll try with a question here. Can you describe, as your understanding, what is the role of Medfield, or in particular the Medfield Police, to oversee the operations of the Westwood Gun Club?
So I've actually contacted the Department of Public Safety and a few other agencies. I've talked to a couple of police chiefs today. They have gun ranges in their town. And basically, oversight of gun ranges rests with city ordinances and town bylaws. There is no state agency oversight. So any complaints we get, if there were noise complaints, we would address them accordingly. That being said, in the last 5 years, we've gotten 8 different complaints of gunshots up in that area. Have not been able to substantiate any of them, because we went up there, the noise had stopped. I believe 4 of them were after 9 o'clock at night. The rest were in the daytime. So my understanding is Other than zoning and building permits and local ordinances, that's basically what governs the gun club. It's a private club.
You may not, well, yeah, you probably would know the answer. So, I'm glad there are some gun club members here, or officers here as well. Can you describe, I don't know how much interaction our police departments had with the gun club. I'm not having a legal discussion here. I'm having, just help me understand the collaborative relationship or the nature of the relationship. If there's an issue where you get a complaint in the police department about something the gun club is doing, I'm not talking about coercing anybody to do anything, I'm just talking about how do we handle that and how's the quality of the relationship?
We've had very little conversation with them because we've had very few complaints. But I plan on grabbing the president's contact information before I leave tonight. So if we do have issues up there, yeah, I would say 8 different calls in 5 years is really not a lot of, that's not really a lot of complaints. It seems to be a well-run club. I've read all their rules and regulations. I do understand the concerns. The houses are basically right on top of the club. They are exempt from the 500 foot from a dwelling, from firing a firearm. Gun clubs are exempt. I don't know what more I can add. Basically, that they have to abide by city and town, city ordinances and town bylaws. There is no state agency responsible for them.
And my general recollection from when this has come up before, Mark, maybe you can help me fill it in, but my general recollection when the Westwood Gun Club came up as an issue in town before was that the town has very little control over it.
There's no bylaws that I'm aware of that would be applicable. I believe at some point, because that the gun club's been there a long time, the subdivision's relatively new, I believe there was a meeting some time ago between the gun club and the neighborhood to try and work out some kind of neighborly arrangement.
Right, Mark, if I can, that was back in 2003, I believe.
Yeah, I know it was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago, and I think they actually moved, and they could probably answer this, they actually moved their shooting pad further into the property, away from the houses, as sort of a neighborly gesture to try to...
Well, and I think we have our answer. I don't know if Gary has any comments about with respect to the building permit and what's being applied for. Do you still have questions about that in terms of what they're applying for in the building permit?
So when we got into this process, the initial...
Just want to slide over just to make sure that folks at home can pick it up.
The initial question was what the application was for, and the answer was an accessory structure. So from my understanding, it could have been anything from a shed to a long-range shooting platform. And then I later found out in talking to the building inspector, I think actually when we spoke, he had contacted the gun club and then was under the impression that it was actually a 30-foot long shooting range that was going to be put in back there. And then actually I requested a copy of the application, and in looking at it more closely, the wording sort of led us to believe that it might actually be a cover to a structure. But again, I was searching for information and sort of met some dead ends.
Okay. But I think
but if again, I guess since we do abut this property, several of us, it is very helpful to know when an application is submitted, what are the details of it, and as a friendly neighbor gesture to know what things entail. Obviously, because even though the gun club was there first, we have several neighborhoods that are now surrounding the gun club, and that the town, approved. So we just want to make sure that it's sort of a win-win for everyone, and that we understand what's going on in our backyard.
Understood. And so a lot of this has to do with communication, so I think it's probably a good time, Mr. George, if you want to weigh in, since I think there is as Gus notes, you're welcome. As long as you have someone hands you the microphone, you can stay right there. As long as you have the mic, then they'll pick you up on TV. There we go.
So I'll try not to be long because I hope this gentleman doesn't mind my leaning on his chair. It's okay. Okay. So a few facts about the gun club. First of all, it was incorporated in 1942. The club acquired the land that is the club in Medfield and Walpole in the 50s. The ranges have been in substantially the same position, shooting in substantially the same direction, directly away from Trailside, I think it is, where these ladies live. I don't know exactly the address,
Live
but
on Wood End.
yeah, it's on the Trailside side, though, right?
You're not shooting at them, you're shooting
We're
away from-
shooting
yeah,
opposite to the
that's right.
development in which they have houses. Let me leave it that way, so I don't get lost trying to get out of Medfield in the dark. There are 100-yard ranges, there's a 50-yard range, there is a long range. Those things have all been there for decades. What the club asked for was a building permit to erect a roof, essentially an accommodation to protect from sun, rain, whatever, on the long rifle range. All these things shoot down into I don't want to say a gully, but a embankment surrounded on three sides. All of those ranges, except for the long rifle range, are not located in any way in Medfield. They're in Walpole. The long rifle range is just over the border into yards away from the Walpole line. The club, as far as a matter of supervision goes, is made up of members who must have firearms licenses. You can't join without first getting a firearms license. You can only get a firearms license from your local licensing authority, the chief of police, or sometimes chiefs will have licensing officers who are usually lieutenants in this town. I think it's the chief.
It is.
And in order to get the license from the licensing officer, you have to take a safety course, which is mandated by the Colonel of State Police. And the Colonel of State Police, the Mass State Police, issues the licenses or permits to the safety course instructors, and there's dozens of them in Massachusetts. So first you have to go to the instructor, who is licensed by the state police. You have to take the safety course, which is pretty extensive. I didn't say expensive, it's extensive. And most of these people require live fire training, not just book learning. Safety instruction is the primary thing. I'll tell you in a minute how I know all this. And if you get approved for the license, then you have to go back to your licensing authority, who has the authority, regardless of whether or not you got the certificate from the Mass Colonel of State Police licensed instructor. The chief of police in your town, any town and every town, has the authority to either issue or deny that license. In order to issue or deny that license, they run what is commonly called out in the streets as a BOP, Bureau of Probation check. And if these people have any number of, shall we say, and it's the right word, I think, disqualifications under Chapter 140, Section 131 of the state law, the chiefs do not give the license. In fact, they're told by the statutes, which were rewritten in 2014, Chapter 140 was extensively rewritten. The chiefs cannot give the license. If the chief gets the BOP and he's worried about things like, 209As on the record or whatever, sometimes not even convictions, they'll deny the license. In order to get the license, if the chief denies it, they have to go to the district court and appeal to a judge. I do some of those cases. They're not often that successful. So the people entering the club have a base of knowledge about the rules and regulations of firearm safety. They also have to be interviewed by the club. There's a committee run by what in the club is called the governor. It's an officership. Mark Gentile, I think he's here, runs that. He's a certified instructor by the NRA. Whether you like the NRA or you don't like the NRA is not the issue. They have a political arm, and then they have a firearms safety division, which is not divorced from. It's the same corporation, but it's not run for politics, okay?
Mr. George, can I interrupt you?
Yes, sir.
Respectfully, I don't think there's any issues from this group about the competence or safety consciousness of the group. This, I really do think, boils down to an unfortunate case where the club was doing something. The neighbors wanted to know what it was, and it was, for at least for a period of time, impossible for them to find out. So, and I'm probably not talking to you on a legal level so much as I'm talking to the officers of the club on a community relations issue that says that everything we're talking about here today has to do with a gap in communications where, especially now that we know what the project is, this would have been a very easily dealt with issue if the communications channels had been in place to do that. I honestly don't, having met this morning with these two ladies, I did not get any hint that they were worried that you were, or the club members were doing anything unsafe or, wild.
Let me address that. The officers tell me that they have been in various circles addressed or accused of being an unsafe range. One of the things about being a safe range is that the club does not want people walking in down the club's road into the property because, after all, we don't have a professional, it's a private club. It's not run like one of these gated communities. We don't, have some guy there to make sure people don't. So they trend to police the thing, and if they have people coming down, okay, and looking at the range, they want them to make an appointment. I believe if the club doesn't have phone numbers, we can provide you with phone numbers. But a meeting should be held, either at your house or at the club, not, just go down to see what's there, because that's a safety issue. Okay?
No, forgive me, pardon me, may I ask? So behind our homes, there's an old Nebo, Road Mount Old Nebo. And so I'm concerned that you might be thinking that is that what you're talking about, you're referencing?
You have what? I'm sorry.
Well, that's part of our easement. We have deeded access, so the gate that perhaps, I don't know if you can hear me. So Mount Old Nebo, and I can provide a map, runs behind Trailside, and then it's also behind Wood End. And that is of significance because that road, we all have deeded access to that road. So it's an old road, but we all have basically half. And to your point about safety, that gate that I believe you might be referencing.
I'm going to sit down, ma'am, okay?
Oh, of course, please.
Thank you.
I wonder if perhaps that the gate that you're talking about, that you have there to help ensure the safety of others, I understand, has cut off access to those who actually have deeded access to Old Mount Nebo Road.
Okay,
So
I think that's a matter that I am not completely familiar with. I
Okay.
understand there is, however, some legal dispute about whether or not the road beyond that gate is in fact a public road.
Okay.
I think it's not a public road from what I've been told.
Okay.
I haven't researched that title.
Of course, sir, I understand. So my point being that when you make reference to, people going down there and perhaps putting themselves at risk, or, I'm not trying to quote you because I don't know exactly what you just said verbatim, but that there needs to be some kind of meeting or communication or something like that. I appreciate that you're offering to give us a telephone number. That would be very, very helpful. But in the meantime, there are children that are playing out there. There are children that are crossing into Trailside. I have two little boys, and part of our deed, and I can show you if I could come up, if I could approach, please. Excuse me.
Ma'am, if you give me a copy of it, I'll be glad to look into it. I don't exactly know what is.
But I provided it to the Board of Selectmen. I don't know that I have another copy with me tonight.
You can give this to him, we can get this otherwise,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, super, thank you. And then, I think it's just the first one.
Sir, do you know when that gate was added? Or do you know when the gate was added?
I don't know when it changed to a, excuse me.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm not actually sure when it.
The newer gate?
The newer gate was this fall, because I can see it from my backyard.
And it is.
So could I ask you, have you got this looks like a plot plan?
It's a land court document, yes, sir.
Yeah, do you have the deeds that go with
I
this?
do, sir. Yes,
Okay.
the corresponding ones, correct.
Do you want to send those to me?
I'd be happy to,
All right,
yeah.
I'll tell you what my email is.
Okay, I'm
It's-
ready.
Well, I think just on this issue, do you have a card you can give her?
Yeah, I will.
Why don't you give her a
I will,
card?
sure.
Although you can get free advertising on the Medfield TV YouTube channel, but I think you got to pay Brett Poirier for that if you want to do that.
Yeah,
So-
no, I
We have a
appreciate
lot
it.
of people that tune into the Board of Selectmen videos.
Oh, okay,
I just
all
want
right,
you to know.
all right. Well, I'm 72, I'm not really looking for work, so.
Is there a reason why the gate was added? Was there something wrong with the previous gate before, or? I mean, there was just like a stiff wall before.
What I will say is that I understand from talking to the officers of the club that the area they have gated is theirs, it's part of their property. And if there's a gate they've put there, the gate is to control access exactly for the reason that you state, ma'am, because your kids are not going to get shot walking into the property. The problem is if you go into an area that has 20 or 30 acres and a lot of woodland and everything else, once they get down past the view of the clubhouse and everything else, then who knows where they're going to go. They could go to places that are dangerous that have nothing to do with the
Well,
club.
certainly. And I think that if anything, my children are, they're well within my reach, but I think that there is just this lack of communication that we need to circle back on so that we can really just be neighborly. We're neighbors. And so if we could just establish that dialogue so that if there are concerns, we have, someone to call. And heaven forbid, if a child did run, and there was some sort of more urgent situation, who do we call? How do we handle that? And that's really what this is about. We want to establish a kind dialogue.
I appreciate that. I understand.
Thank you.
So it sounds like, just looking back to your goals here on
Yeah.
the list, right?
Yes.
So it sounds like as to number 5, we've made some progress in terms of having somebody to talk to. At least you'll have Mr. George's contact information and hopefully have some of the contact information of the officers of the club. And so it certainly seems like there needs to be a meeting between the club and the members, if only to get a little bit of an orientation about what is where and what's going on and all the rest of it, right? So you can kind of have a little safety demonstration of this is what's going on here and this is what we need to be aware of. For number 4, as to understand who's responsible for oversight of the Westwood Gun Club, I think we've gotten about as far as we're going to get on that.
Okay.
Right? I think it's not the Board of Selectmen beyond any other role that we have. And so I don't know,
So, can I ask a question in
Sure.
regard to that? I just
Yeah.
want to make sure we're clear, because it sounded like things were a little unclear, and I would like to talk to the number of calls to the police, because there haven't been a significant amount. And I can speak for myself in that I moved to the neighborhood 13 years ago. And when I moved there, I had 4 kids under the age of 5. And there were times where, they were probably shooting after they, should have been and whatnot. And it can be a very reasonable person to let things go. And, sometimes if I'm trying to put 4 kids to bed and it's, actually pitch dark and it's, late at night, on some occasions I called the police. And again, now we're dating back well beyond, 5 years. And I did in fact hear, this is Walpole's problem, it's on Walpole land, please call Walpole. I'd call Walpole and they'd say, no, the entrance is in Medfield, call Medfield. such that I called, enough times where I became discouraged, and I've just learned to let things go. And I understand that they, they're obviously go through major protocols, being safe and whatnot. I think what was unclear is really like the hours of operation, and if there is a concern, or it is a matter of like, it's late at night and it feels like the gun club is operating past hours, who do we call? So I just wanted to clarify that the police would have oversight of a situation like that and would respond if a neighbor had to call for any reason.
I would think if there was a concern about a criminal violation or a violation of the law, that you should call the police, right? I mean...
Mr. Chairman, if I can just address that.
Sure. I mean, you're welcome to call me after 9 as well, and I'm not sure what I can do for you.
That's okay. You have double the amount of cases.
And you can certainly call us. I think it's actually clearer to me now over the last week or so. It looks like the majority of it is in Medfield, and my office has been instructed.
Yeah.
And they will respond, and I only did go back 5 years. I'd be more than happy to go back further to give you that information if you'd like it.
That's fine. I don't need that information.
Yeah, I mean, but it looks like it would be on us, and certainly call us. And there has been a call, there's been several calls, well, not several calls, but a few of those 8 to 10 calls that we had down there, actually Walpole and Medfield responded.
Oh, okay.
Because it wasn't clear to us at the time. But if I understand, it looks like some of the targets, the long-range targets are in Walpole, but the actual range is in Medfield?
Actually, sir, forgive me for not getting up, all of the firing positions all the way to the targets, except for the one long rifle range where they're putting the roof over the slab that's been there for some time, all those are over the line into Walpole.
Okay.
But that's not to say that we object to the police department coming down. The club does not allow shooting at night, does not allow shooting half an hour before sunset, after that hour. So there's a lot of wild land down there. If somebody is, and this is a thing I've seen before at other clubs, when you have wild land, you have people going into it. I'm talking about going down towards Walpole, not in Medfield. You have people that go down and shoot at all times. If there are people at the club shooting after dark, we're happy to have you there as a police force, because they shouldn't be.
Right. So I think we, as to number, just going back to the goals for the night, just trying to, I think we all understand now what's planned in regards to the expansion, what the status of the building permit is and all of that.
Do you?
I mean,
Sean, do you have any questions?
Just cover it.
Yeah, that's, that's just the building permit. The second goal was to improve the lines of communication with the town and the Westwood Gun Club. I hope you feel like the lines of communication with the town are better than they were on this issue. And then I think we'll hope the same with respect to the Westwood Gun Club now that you have a number to call and someone to speak to. And we'll put a TBD on that to see how good that communication goes. And number 1 is to be determined as well.
Can I ask one final question?
At least
And
one.
actually, could you say, I think, so you, back to the microphone. I'm sorry, squeezing in here. So you had mentioned, I think, when you were speaking earlier, that you learned recently that in researching just the gun club bylaws and whatnot, that the town, I just wanted to clarify, the town has, the state does not have precedence, the town does.
I couldn't find any state oversight on this.
Okay.
Everyone I've talked to said, everyone I've talked to has told me that any town, they have to follow any town bylaws or city ordinances.
Okay.
And I think that town council just said there really aren't any bylaws that cover gun ranges. We don't have any decimal levels or anything like that in town.
And so are there any building bylaws?
Zoning.
Zoning.
It's what's called a pre-existing use in buildings, and so those have a certain protection, and there's a certain process in terms of whether anything that's done the one problem you probably have here that gave rise to all of this is anybody that's had nothing to do with this, it's not limited to the gun range, but somebody who wants to apply for a building permit, there's no notice to anybody. You just go into the building department, apply for a building permit. And so that can have consequences sometimes, and this is an example here.
So, with neighborhoods surrounding a pre-existing gun club, whether they're submitting an application to build a shed, or say, for instance, they wanted to build a shooting range, it's the same application. There's no
As long as,
special.
no,
permit
yeah, that's
process.
correct. As long as all they're doing is applying for a building permit. Now, if they determined, or if the building commissioner determined that it was beyond his capability, that it was an expansion, significant expansion, whatever, and they had to go to the zoning board of appeals for relief, then you would be getting notice of that. Otherwise, you're just bound to, and again, it's not unique to this situation by any means, but you just have to kind of be vigilant, and if you think something's going on, check periodically with the building department to see whether something's been filed, unless you've established some kind of open communication with them, which seems like it would be in everybody's interest to try to do.
I just want to assure you, they're not building any shooting range. The ranges are all there.
I
They've been
understand.
for a long time.
Definitely. I'm just trying to understand the process,
Yep.
because we hit some dead ends, and like I said, we didn't know.
This is a frequent problem. I've represented other gun ranges, sportsmen's clubs, when developers come in and they build houses right next to an existing, facility. Whether that's the buyer's problem or the broker's problem, this is not unique.
Great.
So I think the opportunity here, though, is not a legal, it's not, you got a choice. You can have the law defining what the relationship will be, or a mutual commitment to building a relationship that's not bounded by the law. This is, to me, a situation where the substance of the dispute is not significant. It's got more to do with how the thing unfolded, and I would hope both the residents of Wood End and Trailside and the gun club would recognize the advantage of just having decent communications, that's all.
I agree with you, sir.
I have two suggestions that I would make to, basically to the gun club, which are that, first of all, on your website, I would suggest that you put a Contact Us button so that people can easily find the proper people to get in touch with in the future. I think that would be a huge service to the community. Secondly, I would suggest that you sit down with your neighbors, because certainly they all have concerns over the amount of noise that a gun club makes next door to their homes. And it might be very good matter of neighborliness for the gun club to talk to the neighborhood about any ways that maybe the noise could be lessened in any way.
That would be extremely helpful and appreciated.
Well, thank you to you both for reaching out to us. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Mr. George, thank you very much to you for coming out, and hopefully this will have a happy ending, and you won't have to come back, but if you do, you're always welcome. So, thank you.
I do.
Really project over there, because there's no other good walls.
There's a typing table I can put over there.
Yeah, that'd be great. I have my computer. You want to do it on the computer? Okay, so you want to use my computer, yeah. Okay. That's probably safer. Safer bet.
What?
I thought everybody was here for the senior housing.
So you gave me two, I think. So.
This is not Bay Road. You certainly can.
Hello, Barbara, again. Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go to you next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I could have everyone, as we're filing out, if I could ask if anyone wants to have a conversation, if you could have it downstairs or across the street, so we can continue. I'm going to invite now. Excuse me, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to invite now David Temple and Dan Bible, who are here. They are the co-presidents of the Historical Society.
No.
Or Historical Commission.
Yes.
Co-chairman of the Historical Commission.
Right.
I was confused by the title. The co-chairman of the Historical Commission and all around Medfield history gurus. They're here to present. I'll let Dave describe while he's here to present. If you have everyone's attention, please, for Dave Temple. And again, if folks in the back, want to have a conversation, please have it downstairs, as we need to continue with the meeting.
Okay. Are we good to?
I think we're good to go.
I think we're good to go. Okay. As you guys know, but maybe the people out in television land don't. The Historical Commission is appointed by the Selectmen. The town was first settled 370 years ago, and the Commission's job is to help assure that historic preservation gets appropriate consideration when town development decisions are made. For example, if someone wants to tear down a historic house, the demolition delay by... Yeah, if you don't mind. Yes. If someone wants to tear down a historic house, the demolition delay bylaw gives a chance for us to hit the pause button so alternatives to demolition can be considered. And I got another example of we don't know what's going to be the final outcome, but we worked very hard last spring with LCB developers and the Mass Historical Commission. We were trying to work out an agreement to mitigate the impact of the big assisted living project would have on the adjacent 1740 Clark Tavern and the Peak House. So why are we here today? It pains me to say it, but one of our longest serving members, Anselin Wolf, is moving out of town. And Anselin joined the board in 1997. She was perhaps the best qualified candidate that we have ever seen. She previously worked at the Rhode Island Historical Commission for a decade. She wrote a lot of nominations for buildings that were up for the National Register of Historic Places. She also helped to train people in how to restore old houses. We learned a lot from Anselin, and without her, we probably wouldn't have gotten the town-wide preservation plan that we got in 1999. And she's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting ever since. Anselin and Jack are moving to Medway, and in the course of cleaning out her cellar, she found some extra copies of the preservation plan and the executive summary that I've just given to you. And I know you weren't on the board when it was done, but you may not have seen it. But we followed the thing pretty well. It was a very good plan that Anselin shepherded through. So here's the moment that we've been waiting for. We want to present the Historical Commission's 2019 Preservation Award to Anselin Wolf in appreciation for the good work she's done for the Commission and for the town for the last 20 years. Go there.
All right. I feel very historic.
We're all getting more historic every day we wake up.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Okay.
It's been a labor of love and good boon companions.
Thank you. Yep.
I'd love to, but
Just remember, Medway used to be part of Medfield.
Yes, right. Maybe we can have this continue from Medway.
Thank you, David, and thank you
you
very much, Anselin, for all of your service to the town. All right, now we're going to go from one wolf to another. As we set up the PowerPoint here for the hot off the presses 2018 Medfield Senior Housing Top-Line Results Draft, January 2019 presentation from Barbara Gibbs and Jack Wolf and Dick Scullery.
And Gus Murphy.
And Gus setting up the equipment.
Not that one. That's a work one. That one.
That one there?
Yeah.
Come on, here, I'll stand up with you.
Thank you for coming.
Well, can we just get Barbara the microphone, please, so that folks at home can hear her? What happened to it? There we go.
So there have been 4 of us working on this, besides 3 besides myself. So I do want to give credit to everybody who's here. Gus Murphy is Selectman, Jack Wolf, I guess formerly of the Warren Committee, and Dick Scolari, who is right there, a former marketing researcher. So I'm just going to fairly briefly go through this. So the main objective of this research was to find out what seniors wanted in terms of senior housing in Medfield, the types of features, what the demand was, et cetera, et cetera. So we did a mail survey. It went to 2,204 households. Each one had at least one person over 55. And we got that sample from the census data from Carol Mayer. So we were able, it was a nice clean sample of people who had one person over 55. We excluded Thomas Upham House for obvious reasons. After we sent out the survey, everybody got a reminder postcard, and we sent out 2,200 surveys, and we got 695 back, which is a phenomenal response for a mail survey, which was a 32% response rate. And typically, market researchers say a sample size of 400 is enough to be statistically reliable, so we did better than that. We had a fair amount of communications to entice people to return it. We had sent posters at the senior center. That same poster traveled to a town meeting. The same copy in that poster was put in a Council on Aging newsletter, which Dick personally stuffed, right? And then we had several articles, thank you to Colleen, that were in the patch. And we used a professional research firm, and that was largely for confidentiality so that nobody would know who returned it. And they printed, distribute, and tabulated the results. So objective one of the research was to understand the demand for housing, and I'm sorry, I'm standing in front of you guys, the demand for housing in Medfield. So out of the survey of the 695 people, 19% of them, or 1,410 households, indicated they were extremely or very likely to move into senior housing if it were available in Medfield. That's a very large number, 410 units. An additional 29%, or 648 units, were somewhat likely. And another key number here is how many of them would move and when they would move. So 63% of those who would move would do so within the next 2 years. So if you look at that, it adds up to 256 units within the next 2 years if it were available. And that doesn't include the somewhat likelies. The key reasons that people wanted to move were largely financial. Reduced housing expenses, taxes came up quite a bit, and then a less upkeep for the house or yard. And those who didn't want to move, they could afford to stay where they were. They didn't want to move. Many still had kids that still at home, and if they were going to move, it was going to be out of the area. So just a summary of what the chart looks like. So you can see the 19% who are extremely very likely to move, and we had 23% who are not at all likely to move. When they'd want to move, you look at the first two bars on the right, you can see that 63% of them would move within the next 2 years. And only 3% were looking farther down the line, saying, I'm not going to move for another 10 years. The second thing we wanted to learn is the preferred locations for wanting to live. And two responses came out strongly. The first one was as close to downtown as possible, and the second was at the Medfield State Hospital site. And only 10% indicated that as close to the senior center was their first choice. And our thought was that being downtown and being at the state hospital site offered, more amenities, more things for them to do, rather than, being in a smaller area. So 51% wanted to be close to downtown, and 36% at the state hospital site. Third objective we wanted to learn is about specific housing needs. So a single-family detached home was the preference by 61% of them. Only 7% wanted apartments, which maybe if the Dale Street site turns up as a possibility, may be somewhat of an issue. We can't fit too many single-family homes on, on the Dale Street property. 68% preferred 2 bedrooms, and the majority wanted 3. Ideal number of bathrooms, 1.5 to 2. And we asked how desirable certain features were. The own washer and dryer was only desired by 91%. I don't know what happened to the other 9%. I certainly couldn't live with one at this point. Master bedroom with attached master bath, first floor master, private outdoor space came up high, and single-story living was desired by at least 3 out of the 4 people that we surveyed. I know this is a very hard chart to read. They wanted age restricted over non-age restricted. They wanted pets friendly as opposed to no pets allowed. So some of these things you can read. Single walk-in shower or tub, which in previous surveys I've read has come in higher, only came in at mid-range. Up to 4 was renting versus buying, and the price points. So this is kind of complicated to follow. I'll show you the numbers later. 81%, or 330 units, said they would consider buying, which is definitely would buy, prefer buying, neutral, prefer renting, but would consider buying. Has everybody got that? Colleen, shake your head no. These 81% people excludes the people who would only rent. So they would be open to buying. And conversely, 72% would consider renting, as opposed to only being option of buying. And in terms of the pricing, slightly over half wanted a maximum sale price under $450,000, but there was interest in higher priced units. And you can see, if you look at the demographics later on, that there were some fairly high incomes and people who are still working, which kind of reflected that. And 6 out of 10 wanted rental prices under $2,000 a month. So here's my attempt at a Venn diagram. So the 22% only wanted to buy. The 13% only want to rent, and the rest are willing to take an option of renting or buying. The maximum purchase price, you can see that's 55% wanted under $450, the 2 left bars, and 6% funded over $600,000. And the pricing for rentals was, I think, fairly low, 40% under $1,500, which is where there's a unit in Wilkins Glen that's right under there now, but that's about it. So there, there was some interest in a variety of different rental prices as well. And we asked these questions about what price they were willing to pay after we said, here's the list of features, and here's the number of bedrooms, and here's the number of bathrooms. So taking into account everything you want, what's the maximum amount you would pay? Excuse me. So just some other miscellaneous findings that we have. 19% of seniors indicate they would qualify for 40B, which was 78 units. Another 16% said they would qualify for community housing, which we defined for them. 55% of seniors do not have a mortgage today. Certainly not me. 75% live in a house value of at least $500,000, so that's pretty high. 49% have lived in Medfield over 31 years, and the majority are between 55. It's also interesting that almost half of them are working either full or part-time. I shouldn't say them, I should say us. Incomes, 39% have incomes over $100,000, but there should be noted that 24% did not respond to that question. 21% veterans, and 24% members of the Medfield, active members of the Medfield Senior Center. And those who were members were actually twice as likely to want to move into senior housing than those who were not members. Okay, so looking forward, sort of some key conclusions that we drew is the town should use approximately 400 units as the potential target. And Gus made a chart, which I'll show you next, which you won't be able to read. It suggests that potentially 160 units of senior housing are currently in the works or under discussion. And these include the State Hospital, the Hinckley property, the Legion site, I should have taken that out, Rose Bay, 96 Adams Street, and potentially Dale Street. And no units from the Medfield Meadows or the Legion are specifically designated today as senior housing. So if you kind of pull that with, we have an immediate demand for 260-something units, and you look at the possibility of 160 units, none of which have been started building, you can see there's a gap there. This is Gus's chart. Anybody read it? We've just pretty much gone through the number of units, the number would be affordable, rental, purchase units, and any comments that he would have. And just some interesting verbatim comments. People were asked at the end of the survey to write in anything that they felt like writing in. Great work to keep it up. This is never going to happen in my lifetime. I've given up. I'm not sure seniors will be able to afford living in Medfield. There's near town center, walking distance with sidewalks. Location can't be isolating. People want to be near different things. So all of them are listed in the full report. And kind of our next steps, and we were hoping some feedback from the selectmen here. We've presented to the Affordable Housing Trust. We presented today to the selectmen. Our hope is to present to the Senior Center. I don't know what state the Medfield State Hospital Committee is in. If there's somebody there who would be interested in hearing about all this. The Warren Committee, is somebody here from the Warren Committee?
Still on.
Oh, you're still on. Because I wrote to Mike and said, send somebody. Obviously we put the full report on the link on the website. And I don't know if you want to publicize it on Patch, the other newspapers. I'm kind of not sure how far you want to take this.
You'll have to ask the Patch Mayor about that. Madam Mayor, what about it?
Do you want this kind of thing, or do you want a link to the full report, or what do you want to?
Link to the whole report.
Link to the whole report?
Thank you.
Newspapers at some point? Mike, newspapers?
Reporter just left. He was.
No, he's right here.
Oh, there he is. Oh, he's
Right
hiding
here.
behind Jerry. Okay. No, he hasn't left. Good. Okay.
And is there anything else you can think that we could communicate it to, or who would like to know the results? Come to Lions Club, Toby.
All right, that's great. We'll start with any questions from the board. I've already seen this presentation last Thursday with the Affordable Housing Trust, so we'll start with Pete.
I don't have any questions, but I have a couple comments, I guess, just things that jumped out at me as being surprising. One was the fact that only 10% of the people expressed a preference for being next to the center. which I had thought that led a lot of my thinking about what we did with the land around the center, because I thought that people would want to live next to the center because there are programs for them at the center. So that, to me, seemed very surprising, and I don't know whether it's because they're only 24% of the people were active members of the Council on Aging programs at the center or not. The second thing was, I saw a general indifference between ownership and rental. The 81, 72%, I thought that's close enough that I think that it's a lot easier to do this type of housing as a rental, and so that, to me, that makes more sense. I was struck by how long people that answered your survey had lived in town. I mean, the number of decades that most people had lived in town was huge. And then I guess the only other thing I would mention is, I thought the Legion site, and I can't remember what the name of that place is, but I thought that they were looking to do an over 55.
No.
Never?
It was 2 or 3 developers ago. But the current proposal is not.
Oh, all right. I
The
thought
current
when I met with them
proposal
that it
is
was over 55.
over 10, if you get enough money, or over 15, or over 18. So it's all ages may apply.
All right.
So there may be some senior housing there.
I mean, it's not going to exclude people who are over 55, but it's not a designated, the proposal they're making is not for a designated senior development.
Yep, and that was it. It seems like excellent information, very useful. So thank you.
We did a lot of work on this.
Gus, do you have any questions?
Well, no, but
I hope he has no more
I'll throw it, where did we get that number from? I'd also just throw a few comments out. First, just to reinforce Dick and Barbara's effort and expertise in pulling, I'm thinking the two of you as the ones who actually had, I'm lumping myself with Jack as people that brought common sense maybe on some occasions, but the actual professional expertise was the two of you that knew how to structure this. So a lot of the detailed technical heavy lifting was the two of them. And that's not to detract from Jack or me telling jokes and showing up for the meetings.
Buying coffee.
Yes, just a couple comments on the points that you saw here. One, those numbers of units that Barbara called out, it's actually on the headline of one of the slides, but that's extrapolating the percentage. So the 410 units is if you took the responses we got from the 695 and then applied it to the 2204.
Right.
So that's how we got to that 410. So any place you see units, that's the extended projection based on the response from the surveys. Just so we're clear on that. There is a big, all of this is in the actual report, so you'll see it, but there's, as Barbara mentioned, there's a little bit of conflicting inputs because on one hand, seniors want first single floor standalone housing. On the other hand, their first preference is to be downtown. And so you can't kind of do both of those at the scale that they'd have to be done at. So we know going into this that there are people that are going to be presented with options that aren't exactly everything they thought they wanted, and they're going to have to make some trade-offs in the same way that there may be, to Pete's point, I think you're right, if we're trying to get housing that can be affordable and can be kept affordable, it's probably, there's a good chance we're going down a rental path for a lot of that housing as opposed to trying to structure some sort of a sales process that always holds the pricing down. The other point, that 400, the projection of the 400 units, the point here is it's a bigger than a bread box, smaller than a barn kind of a thing. What we're saying is it's not 40 units. It's not 4,000 units. It's somewhere in that 400 unit is the size of our challenge. And the good news was that it's not like we're just starting from scratch. There are, as we said, about 160 units, and even that was just estimating, but out of that 400 units that you might ultimately want to get, there's 160 that are already potentially applicable. The one other point I'd make, too, and it didn't show up on that table because we didn't include Medfield Meadows, this is a personal comment, but the...
Medfield Green.
Medfield Green, I'm sorry. Yeah, don't resurrect the 12 for sale units in that village cluster concept, and this is purely a personal speculation on my part. I think that format may prove to be attractive to seniors, especially seniors that want single floor living. It's the idea of having 12 units or some, not more than 12 units, almost like they're on a little town street, but it's a wide sidewalk. You don't drive on it, but the houses face each other in kind of a rectangular configuration. They're kind of attractively designed, almost like little, with front porch, but it's like a little community. And I'm going to be curious to see how that project sells and how people react to the purchase units there, because I think that's got potential for seniors, and we'll get to know after that one rolls out. So,
thank you, Gus. Ms. Lynch? Barbara, want to pass the microphone on to Roberta?
So what you just described, would that be a smaller scale that the Ralph Costello built on Spring Street, sort of?
Sort of, yeah. It's I think the state calls it community housing.
Okay.
And so it's the idea of having housing that you can put in a relatively
Like
tight
he did with those big
configuration.
houses.
Yeah.
Exactly, but smaller.
But without it being, not high-end pricing. It's scaled to where.
Nice.
And what it is that you feel, the state says you don't want more than 12 units, because otherwise it feels you're too stretched out. You could have multiple clusters of 12 units if you had a piece of property to do it with. I'm really curious to see how that project is received by the market, because I think there's one example of it down East Greenwich, Connecticut, and it looks really pretty. Interestingly enough, that one down there, the buyers down there, it's down pretty close to the water down in East Greenwich, but the buyers apparently are all single women. And I didn't get the age, but...
I think they have something similar to that in Needham,
Mm-hmm.
and they're cottages that face
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
And my other question is the housing production plan that you adopted back,
2016.
Yeah. So did they identify at that time how many houses that they recommended for seniors? I know they went into, I think I recall them going into saying that they projected so many houses would be needed in the town. And I'm just wondering what that number is as it compares to this number. That's all.
I don't know the answer to that. I know that was one of the deficits that was identified in the housing production plan, was that there was very, very little housing stock in town that was specifically directed towards and appropriate for seniors.
Okay.
There's one other point when you think about the stock for seniors is, again, recognizing the ages, 55 to 74 was the bulk of the respondents. There's a good chance a 55-year-old senior hasn't really thought a whole lot about where they want to go when it comes time to go. So out of 2,200 housing units that are classified as seniors, there's probably at least 2 generations of seniors in there. So the seniors that are at the top end of that need housing right now. Perhaps 20 or 30 years after they've gotten that housing, some of the seniors at the front end of that will be just coming around. And so it's, you can't just look at the number and say, oh, that's it. There'll probably be some turnover even within that group as time goes by.
So I'm going to open this up for questions and comments, and I just wanted to say thank you to Barbara and Dick and Jack and Gus for your work on this. It really is first rate. This is a well-done survey. It's a good supplement to the survey that was done before and providing a lot more detail, and I really appreciate the work on this. So, Tony Santori.
Yeah, Tony Santori, 27 Longmeadow Road, formerly chair of the previous Medfield Senior Housing Study. And I want to commend Jack and Barbara and Mr. Scullery that they did a great job on going in more depth and putting a finer point on the kind of the results that we showed in our study that was done in 17. One of the points that I would like to make is, and it's not a problem with the study, it's what do we do next? And when we did our report, we looked at Medfield seniors who were 65 and older, the value of their homes, what it would cost them to sell their home, and what they would have left to spend on housing. And I think our report showed that there wasn't anything in Medfield that they could afford. And I don't know how that's going to play forward. We talked about this for a long time, and I got a funny feeling that it's not going to be solved by the Board of Selectmen. It's not going to be solved definitely by 40B. That's a loser. And it probably has to be some kind of legislation. And maybe I'll suggest to the seniors and the selectmen that they bring this up with Denise Garlick, who's going to be speaking on the 31st of this month. I mean, it is a senior problem. And you know, you got all these numbers. They want rental for $1,500. They want housing that's $400, $500. That isn't going to get built in Medfield. Even if you force some developers to do it, it isn't going to happen. And that's what people say. They've given up. It isn't going to happen in Medfield, not in my lifetime. And I just hope that someone thinks about that conflict that we have with people, the home values, and what the prices are of housing that's available in Medfield. And as long as we got 40B, you're going to have $800,000, $1 million units. As Mike Sullivan said, those 40B units, the low-end people coming from out surrounding towns like Milford and Framingham, they get the low-income units. And the high-price market-rate housing are people that come in from Wellesley and Dover that sold their big houses. And the poor Medfield seniors, been here 30, 40 years, are kind of out of luck. So I just hope that the ball keeps rolling. And I thank the committee that did the report. It's very thorough. Thank you.
Right. Well, let me speak to a couple of those points, and Jack may want to as well. I mean, the reality is, as you know, there are limits of what the state will allow us to do. So you start right out from the beginning. That's not only in terms of housing development, but it's also in terms of revenue, right? We are limited by the state to using property taxes and using the little bit of the sales tax that they let us to use, right? So the state basically dictates to towns that the only way you can raise revenue is through the most regressive form of taxation that we have, right? And we're stuck with that. Right, we can't do it. Efforts that have been made to try to index it or scale it or what have you, the state rejects it because it's a very convenient way for the state to mandate activities by towns that then get funded by taxes that are raised not by people who are state legislators, not by people who are the governors. So the legislature can impose a mandate on the town. The town has to raise taxes to fulfill it, but your state rep can run for re-election, your state senator can run for re-election and say, well, we haven't raised taxes at all, right? Property taxes keep going up, but your state taxes don't, and they can get reelected in perpetuity, right? So there's the state problem. We can't fix your state problem. I agree you should bring it up with Denise Garlick. I will say that given where things are going, I'm afraid that the concerns you're raising are not going to be high in the mind of our new state Senate president or high in the mind of the state legislature. You might have a better shot a little bit with the governor, but in general, that's not really what they're worried about. But I think we should raise it with Denise and see what she can do. Now, I will say that we did take, and Jack can speak to this as well, the Affordable Housing Trust is going to put another article on town meeting this year for the Hinckley Lot 3 area with respect to senior housing. Now, it's going to have to be a 40B project. Okay, we don't have another option. The other option we tried was soundly rejected for whatever reasons people want to interpret that approach. That was an effort to come up with something that would be in the middle, and people said no. So we're going to take another shot at putting an article on town meeting limited to that area to try to solve some of this. I think one of the motivators for that, and with all due respect to people from Framingham and I don't know where else you mentioned, Milford, I mean, one of the things that was interesting in the survey is that there is a substantial number of households in Medfield that would qualify for the affordable units. And unlike a for-sale market rate project, in a 40B project, you can provide a local preference for people in Medfield. So if you did a market rate subdivision, you cannot provide a local preference of any kind. Under the 40B law, you can, right? Because that's an extra sweetener that the state gives us to let you do. And so of the affordable units, you can set aside a certain amount of them where there's a Medfield preference. That's true in every single 40B development we do. We get the maximum local preference. And so the trust board is going to put an article on town meeting. We'll see what happens. Hopefully there'll be more support for it this time than there was the last time. That's the only thing we can do in the short term. And then I think the other thing that to Barbara, to your point, to speaking to the Hospital Development Committee, I think this presentation should be given to them as well, because I think this ought to be taken into account when we put a finer point on what's going to be proposed for the state hospital, a finer point on the zoning, and exactly what we can do from a zoning perspective up there that would incentivize meeting some of this demand.
Yeah, as a practical matter, a good number of members of the committee, the development committee, have already seen it through the Affordable Housing Trust, so may not require a formal presentation, but just simply getting them the report. And,
right.
I think it's unfortunate that seniors are the ones taking the brunt of this stuff. And I think about 4 or 5 years ago at town meeting, I said maybe we should have a 40S program for seniors, because it really is going to take some kind of an effort like that by the legislature and by the senior community to go to the State House to make a big stink, to pick it, get on TV, is the only way it's going to happen, because otherwise we don't count. We're silent, we don't count. The other thing I would kind of question is people who would qualify for 40B who are living in Medfield. I find it hard to believe, and maybe there are a lot of single people and
I think it's more, I mean, people don't necessarily advertise it, Tony, but I think when, for example, when the park was built, I think one of the surprising outcomes of the park was that a larger number of people from Medfield moved into the park than people anticipated when it was being built.
Yeah.
And so again, I mean, they might be lying on the survey, but at least according to the survey, which I think is a pretty good survey, it suggests there's at least almost 80 households that
But I would assume you could figure out what those real numbers are, because we have economic information, we have home values, we have census data. I don't know. It just sounds like, I mean, how many people do we know that don't have a house that's worth more than $275 or? Not a lot. Anyway, that's my comment.
Okay. Tony, could I throw one other, it's again, personal viewpoint out? I mentioned this community housing. There's more to it on why I'm really intrigued to see what happens with Medfield Green. You know, to your point about, well, you can't get $450,000 or below $450,000 housing in Medfield. You can go 35 minutes south of here and you can get $300,000 or $275,000 housing. And what that tells me is there are builders who build things and they in markets not that far from here that economically can put up a house. So that then says, well, it's the land. If we get to a format that's attractive to seniors, like this community housing, where you're putting 12 units on, I don't know, 2 or 3 acres, then the land cost gets divided across so many units. I'm not convinced that we can't actually, because if you're doing it for sale, it's got to be something which is sufficiently modest and restricted, so you can't just buy a bunch of them and then tear it down, put up a McMansion, but it's sufficiently modest that the market does not, you know, you don't get a subsidized price when the first buyer does it and then it's worth twice that for the next buyer. It's that it literally moves, and there may be some provisions that we can control that, but I'm not sold that we can't do something that does actually offer the, you know, reasonable housing at a reasonable price. Yeah, it won't have a swimming pool with it, but you know, it won't be a single ranch house on a half acre or an acre by itself with a fence. It's going to be somewhat clustered, but not necessarily apartment all the way. And I just think there's an opportunity to do that.
I think you can get to that point, but you have to do it by increasing the density that's allowed.
Well, you do.
To reduce the land cost per unit,
yeah.
And the town turned that down, unfortunately.
Well,
So you'd have to start again on that.
I don't think the town turned the whole concept down, though. I think the town I think that hinged on the fact that they said, well, if you can't reserve it for Medfield seniors, we don't want to do it. Seniors are going to have to come to grips with that's against federal law. And so there's a little bit of give and take here between the senior community and what we can do. And I just don't think people had enough time to sort through that to really think about, am I really happy I turned this down?
So I think the fertile area for doing that sort of thing is on the town-owned lands, either at the Hinckley land, which has now gotten smaller because the Council on Aging has taken back their piece of that, or the state hospital land. And I mean, you can get a manufactured house now, housing unit for around $100,000, and if you can bring that in and plop it down, I mean, and the land cost is fairly small. I think you can get to ownership, if that's what you're looking for, ownership units, if you put them densely enough so that it's doable. But I'm
going to go to Paul here.
Oh, let me just mention one more thing. I've lived across the street from Dick Scolari for 30 years, and I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that his name is pronounced Scolari.
Paul Hinckley. I deal with a lot of the seniors, but the reason I feel that Park Place was a gorgeous-looking place, but most of the seniors I knew had to move out of town because there's no elevators in it. Mm-hmm. And a senior, whether you're 60 and up, they don't want to carry their groceries upstairs and do that. They're just not going to do it. It doesn't work. And someday you'll find out when you be that old. But you need, if they're building apartments, you got to have elevators now. I mean, or they're moving out. I know that's why a lot of people moved out. They went to Millis because they have elevators over there. the reason they went to Norfolk, because they were one-story, but they bought condos that are like 500,000 or 600,000.
No, they weren't that much.
Huh?
Less.
But their taxes were lower, and that's the reason they left, mainly. But I think if we had apartments in here and they had elevators, you would see a lot of the older seniors stay here. And what happens is the new people that are in town, they're bringing their mothers and fathers in town to be close to them, and they're the ones putting in for housing. And right now, the state passed a thing that said veterans come first over Medfield people. So that means every veteran, whether they're from Rhode Island, Texas, wherever. And I don't think that's right. I can see the Medfield veterans coming first, then Medfield people, but not over the whole state. Because they're going to come in, they're going to swoop up all your low-income housing. The seniors here won't have a shot.
Thank you, Paul. Jack, you want to comment?
All of us should recognize in the room that one of the reasons that this survey got done is because of the good work done by Tony and his committee initially. So let's be clear that this got started because of those folks and the good work that all they did here. So Tony, thank you, and thank all of your committee. Gus and I, as Gus indicated, bought coffee. We provided some humor, but the work for this one got done by Barbara, who was the smartest person in the room with us by far. Okay, and Dick was second smartest. Right? But a quick, let me just add something to what Pete noted and the preference for renting. Pete, let me say, if you look at the underlying data, I think we ought to revise that just a little bit. Okay? If we just look at those who absolutely just want to rent and those who would prefer renting, strongly prefer, I think, but would consider buying, that's only 20% of the population. If you look at those who definitely want to buy and prefer buying but would consider renting, that's 54% of the population, okay? So the tendency to prefer owned housing is 2.5 times the tendency to rent here in this town. So let's be clear that although the full panoply of data shows it to be reasonably close, if you look at the strongest two categories on each end, there is an overwhelming preference to own.
I think a lot of that is just our historic fact that we're used to owning, and that's what we're.
I agree.
And it's more heavily subsidized too, right?
Yep. Well,
absolutely.
It'll be interesting to see under the new tax laws whether it continues.
And by the way,
get pretty high before it's not.
I commend the conversation that went on amongst the three of you, a little less from you, Mike, on this, around the issue of let's explore some clever ways to try to find the right kind of density, the right kind of preferences that are here so that Medfield seniors can be served. There was with 263 units. Remember, we only sell 150 units a year here in Medfield. With 263 for seniors alone in the first 2 years, there's a crying demand for senior housing. And we need to do something that gets our Medfield residents into senior housing and into it fairly soon. So I commend what Mike initiated at Affordable Housing, which is the Hinckley land and maybe a bit of Lot 3, Gus's favorite housing location. Okay, so I can only say, please be creative, and thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Any other questions or comments on this issue? Oh, Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah, one thing, page 17, you've got communicating survey results and have other. I would suggest you add planning board to that because a lot of the things that are going to be done will require planning board review and approval.
So noted.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention is one of the reasons I think housing prices are increasing so much is so many people from other parts of the country or indeed other countries want to live in Massachusetts. The MAPC has recommended that Massachusetts needs to build 430,000 housing units in eastern Mass by 2040. If you don't think that's going to have an impact on land prices, you're living in a fantasy world. It's the pressure to, and it's coming from developers, it's coming from lots of different groups, to build, and they're willing to pay more money. And that, in my mind, is what really is driving up the cost of housing. It's that they can make lots of money on it by packing 400,000 housing units in, and if they can put 800,000, they'll put 800,000, the price will go even higher. So I think we need to address how do we want to live? Do we want to live jammed together? Do we want to live like we're in New York City? Do we want to become the Brooklyn or the Bronx of Manhattan, squeezed in with apartments, or do we like the lifestyle we're living now? And I think we need to address that before it's gone, because it's going very quickly. So.
Thank you, Mike. All right, doom and gloom. One last time.
No, it's positive.
You didn't mention the zoning trends.
Yeah, right. All right, thank you very much, everyone. So action items. Action items. So we have a request to authorize me to sign a contractor form and contractor authorized signatory listing form pertaining to the Student Awareness of Fire Education Grant. Have any questions, comments, discussion?
Ready?
I'm ready.
I move that we authorize Chairman Marcucci to sign the contract form and contractor authorized signatory listing form pertaining to the Student Awareness of Fire Education Grant in the amount of $4,154.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
All right, we have a request by the Zoning Board of Appeals that we appoint Jared Gustafson as an associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Any questions, comments, or discussions? We have a letter from Mr. Gustafson expressing his interest and a memo from the ZBA endorsing his appointment.
Ready?
I have no comments or questions. Yeah.
I move that we appoint Jared Gustafson as associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. All right. Discussion item, review draft copy of the 2019 ATM articles. Anything you want to raise with us in particular, Mike?
Yes, good night and farewell.
That's it. It's our problem now?
Yeah.
All right. I don't have anything particular to discuss. I mean, I asked to put it on here just in case. We will be adding, Sarah and Courtney are going to put together the specifics on the article for the Affordable Housing Trust. That'll be ready before the warrant
Could I
closes.
just ask a couple of questions, just from my knowledge? The cable peg access, that's the establishment of a revolving fund. I assume that's what that article's about?
Not really a revolving fund, it's a specialized account.
And is it under the control of water sewer? Who controls it?
You just said cable?
Well, I think, is this associated with the cable on the water towers?
No,
It's
The TV.
Oh, okay, it's a separate
It's the
thing.
money we get from the state.
Yep.
There's been this running battle from the Department of Revenue for some time period as to how municipalities handle that.
Yep.
They want to see oversight. Most towns, such as ours, simply writes a check over to the Cable Access Corp. They're basically saying, that's not acceptable. You need to put it into your municipal funds and then appropriate it out.
Okay.
And so there's several ways to do that, and basically you have to accept legislation. You have a deadline to do it by next July, and then implement it.
Okay.
It's going to create a problem, though, because what happens is you need an appropriation the way this legislation is drafted. So you set up the fund, the cable monies come in, they go into that fund, you need an appropriation to get it out. So if you've only got one annual town meeting per year, the Cable Access Corp ends up short of funds for a year. And there's been some suggestions about remediating the legislation, but nothing's happened on that yet. So,
And this is getting more and more common. There's another article that will be on the warrant this year to appropriate $742 from the Uber Lyft funds. You get 10 cents from every ride that originates in Medfield. And the Department of Transportation said, okay, you can spend it without appropriation. The Department of Revenue said, you've got to hold that money in a special account, put an article at town meeting floor, write to the state to tell us how you're going to use it, and then appropriate $740. So we've got to sit on it for a year for $740. And it'll cost us probably more than $740 to comply with the rigmarole. This is how foolish these people get.
We need to use more Uber and Lyft then, I guess. That's the answer.
Yeah.
Get that number up.
Don't use it at all and don't have the number.
Yes.
Anything else, Gus?
I'm just, give me 1 second here.
You know, one suggestion they might have, if the state won't give money to redo the sign at the Peak House, you might consider using some of the meals tax money to help them out with that.
Do we even have the ability to do that if it's a state sign?
The building is owned by the Medfield Historical Society.
About the sign.
And the sign's been there for, what, 60 years or something, so I don't think they're going to complain, yeah.
90 years.
I'm going to domain first.
The other question is whether anybody would notice if we changed it.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly.
Mr. Massaro. Did a microphone, sir. Is this your first meeting?
Isn't this the support group for the, oh, no, I'm sorry.
Gamblers Anonymous.
That's it, that's right.
He objects to that. He is not anonymous.
I just provide the transportation, that's all I do. I don't know what the sign looks like. I don't know if it's brass or whatever, but if it's a brass sign.
It's like a cast iron.
So
or
there's
something.
been some work done with signs for the hospital and replacing some of the signs that were up there on some of the memorials and some of the veterans memorials and everything else with aluminum. There's also a technique that uses like a polystyrene background or whatever that's gilded and everything else. And if the town has the ability to make its own sign and put it there, and it's not subject to some kind of approval by the Department of Transportation, you might consider exploring that. I just throw that out.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure it'll only take like 11 different letters and meetings with our legislators to get permission from the state to fix the sign. Right. Okay. Pete, anything on the warrant articles?
No.
Okay. Pending, discuss appointments to the Townwide Master Planning Committee. We've got 11 names here, 8 of whom have been advanced by committees who are entitled to place members on the Townwide Master Planning Committee, and 3 citizens at large who have submitted their resumes. Does anyone want to discuss any of these particular folks? I'd be happy to appoint. I think each of the people here would bring something interesting and beneficial to the committee, but if anyone wants to discuss any of these folks.
I'm good with all of them.
I'm happy to accept all of them. Okay. You said 11, though. I think I only saw 10. Was it 11 or 10?
Let's see. Well, Mike Pastore was added late.
Oh, Mike Pastore.
So we have Mike
Okay.
Pastore in red. Is the
Oh, I was
warrant
looking over
committee
here.
member.
That's
Yeah,
the 11th one.
warrant
Okay,
warrant
okay.
committee
Yep.
member. So if we could take a motion?
Do we,
Can
before we,
I have a question?
Yeah.
So, Evelyn, is this my name on this one?
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah, I was just curious how my name got on there.
I was too, because we didn't call out COA as one of the items, but it made sense.
I don't remember that.
You went to Virginia.
Was that like a year or so ago?
No, that's back in the fall.
In the
Well, I thought
fall?
COA was one of them.
Really?
I checked this afternoon, because I would have thought it was
I
too.
did?
It may have just been, we may have just messed up.
You seemed really happy about it.
Oh, well, you know.
Then do we want to designate the selectmen?
See what happens when you go to Virginia?
Skip that conversation.
Defer to the consensus.
I am too.
So do you want out, Roberta? You back in?
We're negotiating a settlement.
What's the commitment?
It's only, look, you're meeting twice a week. Only for 2 years.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm done.
Monday mornings and Friday nights. How does that work? I think it's once a month.
Oh, I can handle that.
Okay. Once a month. All right. Do we have a motion, Mr. Clerk?
I move that we accept the 11 names. Do you want me to read them all, or?
We appoint them.
We appoint,
Yeah.
we appoint the, well, let me read the names. Teresa James, Jessica Riley, Mary McCarthy, Tom Erb, Roberta Lynch, Kevin Ryder, William Harvey, Michael Pastore, Jay Duncan, Jerry Potts, and Philip Stashenko to the Townwide Master Planning Committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Leaving 4 open spots for interested persons. If you are interested in the appointment to the committee, please email Evelyn Clark, eClark with an E at medfield.net. Continued discussion regarding the Historical Society outstanding water bill.
So I sent an email to Bill Harvey, but it was today. I haven't gotten a reply back. Yes, last week's discussion basically said, well, we're waiting to hear back from the Water and Sewer Board. We have not heard back from the Water and Sewer Board. I sent Bill an email today asking him, where'd you guys come out? And so he hasn't really had time to respond, so.
We can put that over to the next
Put
time.
that over the next time.
Okay. Licenses and permits, our consent agenda, which is our requests from the Council on Aging. And since there's only one thing on the consent agenda, I'll read them all. They are requesting one-day wine and malt beverage permits for the Supper Club, January 16th, St. Patrick's Day Dinner, March 13th, Supper Club, April 10th, all dates 4 to 7 p.m. Do we have a motion?
I move that we approve a license to the Council on Aging for a one-day wine and malt beverage permit for the Supper Club on January 16th, St. Patty's Dinner on March 13th, Supper Club on April 10th, from 4 to 7 p.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
All right. So this has to be probably, what, Mike, about your 800th town administrator update at a Board of Selectmen
Probably,
meeting?
yes, yeah.
Somewhere in there. So any update for us?
Not really, no. I think I just wish good luck to my successor and Evelyn, and I know they'll do a fine job. And
You've really
There's
cleaned
a
up your
huge
office.
update. Your desk can
Right.
be seen.
still got 2 days to empty the file cabinets, so I ain't there yet.
I urge you all to walk in there and see it.
I want to know where the gavel's going.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I couldn't raffle it. I'm waiting for the swap area to open.
Right. Thank you, Mike. And then I guess one footnote Gus had mentioned to me, I mean, we do have to have a Board of Selectmen representative on the Townwide Master Planning Committee as well. I don't know if either of you have thought about whether you're interested in doing that. One of the notes in here suggests to me that one of my committee assignments is about to be reinvigorated, which is the collective bargaining piece of it. So, while I'm interested in this Townwide Master Planning Committee, I think if we're going to be collective bargaining, I probably have to be collective bargaining.
So Pete, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to do it.
It is kind of
but-
Pete's turn.
Well, that's
You did
true
the
too.
hospital development
That's true too. But the point is, I'm willing to do it, but it somehow felt like there's probably a logical choice among the three of us. So I'm not campaigning for it. I'm just saying.
I'm sorry, you're saying you're the logical choice?
No, I'm saying I'm not at all sure I'm the logical choice. I'm saying quite the opposite. Possibility that there is a logical choice and it's not me.
I'm
Apparently it's not mine.
happy to do it.
Happy to do it.
Okay.
So, can we have a motion also to appoint Selectman Peterson to the Townwide Master Planning Committee?
I move that we appoint Selectman Peterson to the Townwide Master Planning Committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Mr. Chair, are you prepared to designate a chair for the purpose of calling the first meeting of that committee? Or you're going to wait till you get the other 4 slots filled?
Of the Collective Bargaining Committee?
No. Yes.
The Townwide Master Planning Committee? We probably should.
Name in red there, maybe that's
Mike Pasquale.
indicates the chair, does
I
it?
think Mike.
How about Roberta?
He's busy.
Well, Pete, if you want to do it, I would suggest to you. Otherwise, other people who have served on committees there are Teresa and Jessica, Tom. But Jay Duncan was on the Master Planning Steering Committee. Does anyone have a thought between those folks?
I'd rather not be the chair, actually.
It's only to call the first meeting.
They have to
It's
suck
only
you
to
in
call the first meeting, and
I
you
know,
can
but then you end up
reorganize.
staying on as the chair.
Well, all right, I mean, so, well, how about this? How about we ask Jay Duncan if he'd be willing to do it, since he was on the steering committee for the planning of the master plan? Sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Call the first
Yep,
meeting
yep.
to order, and he can work with Sarah.
What's the difference between the one that these 11 people are being appointed to and the master planning steering
Steering
committee?
committee doesn't exist anymore. That was just to study whether we were actually going to do a townwide master plan, how it would be done, how long it would take, what it would cost, and all the rest of it. This is actually to do it. So that committee is gone.
To implement the statutory procedure.
Yeah.
We have committees to determine if we need committees.
Right. I think the theory was that if we did it that way, there might be a little more direction for the master planning committee once it was appointed, and it wouldn't take that long.
So is there like a mission or a charter?
There is a charter.
It's posted on our website.
Okay.
Under the townwide master plan.
Right.
In there.
All right.
Out for a couple of days.
All right. Selectmen report. Pete.
Medfield Foundation met.
I'm sorry, the action list. I'm sorry, this Board of Selectmen action list.
So, we don't necessarily need to spend time on this if you don't want to, but we basically have this as a standing item.
Yeah.
And every time we say, oh, okay, action item, well, I guess we don't have time today, and I was thinking we would have time tonight. I'm going to suggest something, and we don't have to start this week, but I was going to suggest that we review the actions for a particular department in each one of these meetings. And my view is we have too many actions on this, so the first pass for this is what do we get rid of? So I'm just going to suggest from a process standpoint that we start there. We don't have that many actions for the town administrator, so I'd jump to DPW first. But I'm just going to make a proposal that at our next meeting, that we start and basically say, just review those actions. Let's have a discussion of which ones belong in there.
Okay.
With the goal of at least getting, if there's any that don't belong there, it's an awfully long list that makes it kind of non-manageable.
And would you mind printing that out for us and at least you have it printed out, printing it out and putting it in our folder, the Selectmen action list?
Why don't I send the DPW action item list to Mo?
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I have a strong feeling there are some things on that list that have already been completed.
I think you're right. Yeah, that'd be
So let me
great.
have him
Okay.
give us an update, and then we'll know.
I'm just thinking that that way we got like 6 different departments here. We chip away at each one and then we get to something we can actually work from. Okay.
Okay, that's a good idea. Pete, Selectmen report.
Medfield Foundation Board had a meeting last night, and very successful angel run, even though it was raining very hard. Still a good amount of money was raised for families in need in the town. Secondly, the volunteer awards. The open period to nominate somebody expires at the end of the month. So if you want to nominate that special volunteer that you have seen do a lot in town, do it by the end of January. Thank you. Reception is on May 31.
March 31.
March 30, yes, thank you, my God. 3 to 5.
And every once in a while you get to do fun stuff. So this morning, I'm not sure if Pete, I think you've signed up at least. Bonnie Wren Burgess had invited a number of people to kind of review and coach her composition class on their college essays. And so I went this morning and did it, and it's kind of fun. You got seniors who are working on their college application essays and kind of quickly go through the essay and give them advice. And it's been a while. I also learned, I was able to participate in the security procedures at the school where you have to go in and fill out a name tag and put it on there. I did not get a chance to test whether I had to be escorted to the men's room or not because they didn't need to use it. But
I'm doing that as well with the essays.
yeah. So anyway, it was fun. Every once in a while I get to do a fun thing this morning. That was kind of fun.
So do you get blamed if the kid doesn't get his first choice?
I did put together a draft warrant for you people to review to see if there was anything that was left out, any articles you want or any articles I put on that you might not want in there. So Evelyn and Chris have it, and they can send it to you, and I've been working with Mark on it. So we're up to about 35 articles.
So just so you know, there's on the second page, in that you brought it up, there's a rezone southerly side of West Street. On the third page, or in the last page, I guess it's the third page, it sounds an awful lot like the same one that's on the second page. So I think we have a couple of
It could well
duplicates.
be, yeah. It's very rough drafts. so.
Okay. That's it.
And the budgets are just about all in. I think it's just almost everything is in now, so if you want to start reviewing them, you're ready to go.
Will you, will we get a book with all those, or?
Your book's here tonight.
It's already here, okay.
So, Affordable Housing Trust Board, we met last Thursday, and we're going to meet again the first Thursday in February, which will likely be our final review meeting for the Mayrock proposal at the Legion, and then we'll be looking to schedule Mayrock to come in here at some point thereafter to present to the Board of Selectmen. Stay tuned on that. I'm going to try to slot it in if we have a meeting without a ton of stuff on the agenda, so we can have some time for that. For our next meeting on the 29th, as much as possible, because we're going to meet on January 29th, and again the following Tuesday in February. I'd like as much as possible the meeting on the 29th to be about the budgets. And if we could look through the budgets that we have, and if possible for us to kind of vote a preliminary view on the budgets that are under our purview, so at least the warrant committee has our initial take. Obviously, that can be revised as we go through the process. I'd like to do that on the 29th. So if we could review all those things, everyone's got a binder in the room. The other thing I think we should do at our next meeting is, we had talked about this in the process of hiring Christine, but I think we should talk about Christine's half-year goals for the first period, which is going to be part of the review process. I think we should keep them to a relatively small number. So if we each think of what goals we have, and then we can try to come to a conclusion next week as to what, the 29th, what those would be. Christine, obviously would like your suggested goals as well for the first 6 months, so we can get into the cycle of doing that. So other than that, I mean, if stuff comes up, we'll deal with it, but if we can deal with those two items, as well as the selectmen action item list, that would give the warrant committee some stuff to work with respect to our budgets. And we will also have, I believe, the next school committee budget meeting of note is on Monday, January 28th. So we should have more, Christine, is that right?
Yes,
That's right.
7 o'clock on Monday, the 28th.
28th, so we should have more information about that as well, and how that factors into the whole process. Jerry, are you looking to say something?
Yeah, when you're ready.
Please do.
Okay. Jerry Kazandra, 77 Granite Street. First of all, I don't usually get to attend selectmen meetings because I'm always involved with something with Scouts or the Boy Scouts that Tuesday nights. But tonight I had off, so I decided to come up. And I'm speaking on behalf of all of us who watch you on TV from cable. And you just did it again, Mike. We have a problem with the microphones on TV. And I'm going to suggest something when I finish with this. Mike, you have a habit of touching the microphone and tapping on the table, and it comes out real loud at home.
You've got the band director here with the feedback. Thank you.
And Gus, you tend to sit back and like doesn't pick you up as well. Pete, you speak softly, doesn't pick you up well. Mark and Mike, you guys have been sharing that microphone, and you don't share. You don't share. And this is a serious problem. When you're listening at home, and like tonight's, all that confusion was going on, people leaving and all that. So what I'm going to suggest is to get rid of those microphones and use a lavalier mic that goes around your neck, because every time, Mike, you would turn and talk to Gus or to Pete, the microphone...
You can't hear me.
...with me there. So put in your budget for the new microphones, or sell those on eBay or something, and get some new mics, because it is a problem at home. Just want to let you know.
Yeah, thanks.
That's good feedback.
You'll have to wait a year.
Because Mike,
All right. So Medfield TV, how about it? Come on.
Lavalier mics
here
would
we go.
help.
You could just not turn and leave.
We could just stand like this and look like this here. So Gus, what do you think? Well, the answer would be actually a different shaped table. Where we could look at each other.
Or headset. I can wear a
I'll
headset.
make my observation as long, because I happened to watch a section of Selectmen's meeting the other day. That camera there is shooting down.
Yes, it's the bald spot cam. Yeah.
Well, no, so it tends to catch you at an angle down.
Right.
You almost have to overcompensate.
Does it make him look thinner or fatter?
Balder.
It is a serious problem
This
when
meeting
you're
is
trying to
taking
listen
kind
at
of a
home.
turn here, Jerry, but.
See, I thought
You're touching
Jerry
the
was
mic
going to
again,
say.
Mr. Marcucci, stop touching the microphone.
I thought Jerry was going to tell us, speaking on behalf of everybody who watches the YouTube videos, how entertaining we are.
No, because they can't hear
Well,
us.
we can't hear the jokes. When you do say something funny, Gus.
Sometimes it might be better off they don't hear you.
That's right. Plausible deniability, right?
Well, anyway, so get rid of those mics, get some lavalier mics, it might help.
Thank you,
Is that
Jerry.
that? Okay,
See, Mark
I'm done.
and Mike, they're whispering during all the meetings, and I assumed that you just didn't want it picked up.
Turn it down because I can hear you guys and what you're saying.
Not me, it's Sullivan, he's leaving.
You want it on the mic.
I plead guilty on all counts.
We're not going to let you attend any more meetings.
All right. Any comments on our suits, Colleen, or anything, or no?
I was trying out a new lipstick. How are we doing? Are we?
Jerry, I do appreciate the feedback. I will confess that I've been told that before with respect to moving away from the mic, and I thought I was doing better, and I appreciate the correction that I'm not.
It was
So.
actually perfect last week.
Last week?
Yeah.
When I wasn't
You
here.
weren't here.
Maybe I should just go, I'll just go into Mike's office now. I'll call in from the speakerphone. Right.
When we first started cable, Chuck Fuller was town council, and he had a pencil with a eraser on the end, and he would tap it, and it would go out over the microphone all night long. You'd hear us tapping.
All right. Any final comments?
No.
Mr. Wolf.
They can't hear him
I don't have a lavalier mic. I think this is Mr. Sullivan's last meeting. Would it be good to offer him a standing round of applause and thanks for all? Oh, you did it earlier.
Yeah. We'll do it again.
Let's do it again. The beginning and the end. Alpha and Omega.
Well, let me offer a round to all the people who have helped me over the years.
I thought that was going to be a round of drinks.
In Medfield at 10 o'clock.
All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Party's over. All right, yeah, move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
I think Colleen would like.
The preceding was a production of Medfield TV.